Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us this evening. My name is Andy Mcgraw. I'm an associate professor of music at the University of Richmond here in Virginia. And in a normal year, we would be having our wonderful guests live performing on campus as part of our global music series that's co-hosted between University of Richmond's International Center and the music department. And in fact, the place where we normally have our concerts would be perfect for this music. So here's hoping that we can bring them to campus next year to perform live for us. So tonight will be about an hour. We'll have about 45 minutes of music divided into three pieces, and the performers will tell you more about those pieces once we get going. And then we'll have about 15 minutes for questions. If folks want to pop a question into the Q&A box, I can help moderate questions for the performers. Tonight, we're really, really lucky to have two young virtuosi performers of South Indian music, Rohan Krishnamurti and Sruti Sarathy, and they're going to be playing, Rohan's playing the mridangam, and Sruti is playing the violin. You will hear a droning instrument in the background, an invisible musician just off to the side that's probably in a box about this big, right? So I'll hand it over to the musicians, and I hope everyone enjoys what will be, I'm sure, a beautiful concert.
Namaste, good evening. It's so great to be with all of you. Shruti and I are very happy to present this short set of Indian classical music and especially Carnatic music for the University of Richmond's International Center in the Global Music Series. It's really a great opportunity for us to share the music that we love and that we have spent so much of our lives in with all of you, and just a great way for all of us to connect during these very challenging times. So the music that we're presenting tonight is Indian classical music, and specifically the Southern Indian style of Indian classical music, which is called Carnatic music. Carnatic music is a very ancient system of music that has a history of over 2,000 years. There is a huge body of compositions, songs that we learn and perform, and these have come down to us over the centuries. They're typically passed down from generation to generation in the oral tradition. So we learn all these compositions from our teachers primarily by listening and by learning it entirely without notation. So the compositions are in a variety of Indian languages and on a variety of topics, and they cover a vast array of ragas, which are melodies, and talas, which are rhythmic meters. So the piece that we just performed is called Sri Mahadmuthi, and this is by one of the most revered composers of the 18th century in India. His name is Muthuswami Dikshitar, and this is in the ancient Indian language of Sanskrit, and it is set to the traditional raga called Gaulai, and the 7-beat meter, which is called Misra Chapu. So these compositions are complete in and of themselves, and they're masterpieces in and of themselves, but they also provide a launching pad for us to improvise, to spontaneously create melodies and rhythms that are completely unprepared, unplanned, and are coming out just in the moment. So these are the pieces that we learn, that we study, that we practice, and we're very happy to share some of these with you. So I'll turn it over to Shruti to talk a little bit about the next piece that we'll be performing.
So as Rohan mentioned, compositions are a major part of our music, and equally so, improvisation is another place where musicians can express their creativity within a raga. So the next piece that you will hear will have some improvisation followed by a composition, and this particular form of improvisation is called Tanam, which is a sort of free form rhythmic exploration within a particular raga. So the raga that we have selected today is called Bilhari. And yeah, you'll see that the Tanam, the form of Tanam particularly gives a lot of scope for exploration outside of lyrical content. So what each particular instrument can sort of express on its own. So that is something that you'll hear in the Tanam portion. That will be followed by the composition. And the composition is a place where the instrument, at least the melodic instrument, tries to imitate the voice. So you have the words in mind, you have the syllables in mind, you try to bring the feel of vocal music. So you'll see both the instrumental side and the sort of vocalized style in this next piece. The composition that we will be playing is called Nadi Vadhara, composition of another great 18th century composer, Tyagaraja. And he was a Telugu composer, though he also wrote in Sanskrit sometimes. And in this composition, he says, it's devotional music. So he's speaking to God, and he says, God is the essence, the foundation of my life. He's like the flowers of my worship. And many, many more such examples to elaborate that basic idea. So this is Ragam Bilhari.
give me a second to catch my breath. Okay, well, thank you so much. Thank you. We have one actually very short piece that we'll finish up with here. This is a piece from the North Indian classical, the Hindustani repertoire, and this is a song in a beautiful melody called Desh, in a 3-beat folk meter called Dadra, and this is a piece that incorporates some of the other elements of the North Indian classical style and approach to raga and tala. So I'll turn over to. Okay, you'll get to hear the lyrics of this line at the very beginning of the piece. Hope you enjoy it.
चले चले कृष्ण कान्हा चले चले कृष्ण कान्हा चले चले कृष्ण कान्हा चले चले कृष्ण कान्हा
Thank you so much. So we have a few questions in our Q&A area here. And I can share these with you. So Martha Merritt, our Dean of International Education, says, thank you for a wonderful concert. And she asked, do young people in southern India know and appreciate traditional music? And how about Indian Americans in the US? So I guess the question is about kind of general audience understanding of the classical tradition, both in South India and in the States.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much for tuning in. That's a question that we have, I think, maybe 9 minutes left. I could probably take 9 months to answer. Huge question. Short answer, from my experiences, yes. I think a lot of young audiences, young artists are very much into the classical traditions. Like so many other traditions these days, things have become a lot more accessible, been disseminated because of technology, social media. There's a lot more availability to the concert experience of the music than ever before. In general, the further back you go, the more closely sort of knit the communities were, the tighter the sort of social structures were that supported the music. Those things have brought in a lot more. Not to say that it's universally accessible or anything, but it's become a lot more accessible. A lot of young artists are also, I think, very interested in crossing boundaries, crossing genre boundaries. A lot of artists, including even both of us, would probably use any number of titles to describe the work that we do. Of course, Indian classical, but we also study the North Indian classical tradition in addition to specializing in the South Indian classical. We've also studied Western classical music, jazz, been exposed to a lot of different forms of pop. So our work really kind of expands a lot of different genres. So that, I think, has also helped sort of broaden access to the music. People are able to sort of appreciate it from a lot of different angles now.
Yeah.
Great.
I think I would also say that, a Carnatic musician in the popular imagination looks like one thing, like an older person from a certain part of the world, etc. But I think, there's a lot of young musicians who kind of subvert what that notion or what that image is of what a Carnatic musician is. And I think that's a good thing. It keeps growing.
Yes, we won't ask how young you are, but you're definitely proficient for your age. Diana Trin asks, she says, great performance. How long do you guys need to practice a piece before it's performance ready? And she also says, Sruti, you have a beautiful voice. So you might want to address like how much of it then are compositional bits that you need to practice together ahead of a performance versus to what extent can you improvise live together to bring it together?
Yeah, again, really, really great question. The sort of running joke is that for an Indian classical performance, we just meet on stage. We don't rehearse at all, so there's no rehearsal whatsoever. The flip side to that is we've been rehearsing our entire lives for this, right? So every day we spend hours, learning the composition. So as I mentioned, there's a huge body of songs that are part of the Carnatic tradition. So we're all expected to know those. Even as a percussionist, as a drummer, I'm expected to know the songs very well, very closely. I'm oftentimes singing the song on my instrument. I'm not just playing a kind of like a drum loop or something. So you're really expected to know the songs a lot. But that being said, the tradition has enough improvisation that if the two of us practice the songs separately, we can actually come together and meet on stage and perform the song, and many songs like that for hours and hours on end. So it is possible to do that. And I would say most of what we did today, in today's performance was unplanned, spontaneous, and I think both of us probably forgot most of what we did already. So it happens, just in the moment for, in that specific context, and then it's, it turns into something else the next time you do it. So, but there are, of course, certain, these are sort of like the standard repertoire, the standard rep that we're all, that we all learn, that we're all exposed to. That's kind of how that works. But there's some pieces that are less common. We also played a lot, actually, today with some of the forms of Carnatic music. So this was not a standard kind of concert sequence. Like we played with some of the different forms. We played with the interplay of the instruments, how the instruments actually trade. So so we were interested in kind of exploring some of those sort of new aspects of how the instruments can actually work together. So so for those types of things, a little bit more rehearsal helps. So we did talk about it. There was a lot of texting, a lot of WhatsApping, sending ideas back and forth. So so those types of things happen a lot. Again, technology has made again a lot of things possible today. Of course, even we're all connected now, thanks to technology. But we also did spend some time sitting and practice some of these ideas. So so we actually had more of I would say a strong foundation to launch our improvisation. So it wasn't let's just practice this so it's totally set and we'll just kind of regurgitate it and then that's it. No, I mean we practiced the basic ideas. So we said, okay, we have a shared understanding of the grammar, the flow, but then we were building on that in a completely spontaneous, unplanned way.
Well, there's a related question here from Ellen Sales about the role of notation in this tradition. So you're saying texting, you're saying WhatsApping. So some people might assume that this is a form of notation, but it's generally described as an oral tradition. So can you kind of flesh that out?
Yeah. Again, it's a complicated thing. The melodic system of Indian classical music has been written down, has been notated for a little bit longer, I would say, than the percussion, than the rhythm. So there's a whole system of solfege, a way of basically sort of symbolizing the melody and the notes of the melody. So that's been around for at least a few centuries, if not longer. The rhythmic part of it has been notated maybe for about a century, but it's even then it's still not really standardized. Everyone has kind of slightly different way of doing it. It's based on the just like the melody is based on the solfege, the swadas of the solfege. The rhythm is notated based on the syllables of each of the drum strokes. So there's a whole drum language that we also learn and speak. So it's kind of notated based on that. There's a more even abstract level where the rhythms are just referred to as threes and fives and sevens, and you are then you can interpret those rhythms in any number of ways. So so that's usually how we end up kind of exchanging ideas.
Yeah, I'd say practically speaking, notation is at best a memory aid. It's just something. It's the very basic structure of a composition. From there, you have to sort of internalize it, and then you can also embellish it in so many ways that come to you. So yeah, I think it's just a sort of like very basic documentation.
Marian asks, well, she says, the second piece made me weep, truly beautiful and amazing. And she's asking about the violin and how it is tuned in this context and what its traditional referent might be. Now, I understand the violin in this tradition to be a traditional instrument in this repertoire, but the question might be, maybe it's a historical question. When it entered, what might have been the immediate kind of association in terms of an instrument rather than voice?
Yes. So, okay. So first of all, the tuning, I've tuned this to D, A, D, A. So it's down tuned from your Western tuning. In terms of, a historical referent, I have seen, there have been some research, some people who have researched to find that there are ancient instruments that may resemble the violin. But I think, practically speaking, the violin entered around sometime in the 17th century along, when the British were in India. And I think what is remarkable about the instrument is how closely it, it can produce so many different kinds of sounds, starting with the human voice, but also it can do many things that the veena does, which was, before the violin came, that was the primary melodic instrument. And it can do many things that the voice can do, and then it can do things all on its own, so it was really very suited to the music to sort of be adapted into it. But then beyond that, I would say from what the Western instrument is, it has also been sort of Indianized. We have a completely different way of playing it. There's a separate like system of technique, of sound, of tone, all as what we value in good violin playing, which has since evolved. So that is, I think, fascinating in its own right, like the history of this particular instrument. There may be some ancient, I'm not really too familiar. I've heard it said that there could be some ancient instruments which sort of resemble the violin.
Thank you. Yeah, and I would say you trace back most European string instruments, trace them really far back. They start to go back in that direction anyway. So we should wrap up soon, but there are two questions. One should be easy. What's the mridangam made of? Two could be a lot more involved, and it's how did you get into this? And maybe the question could be like, when did you first start training, and how did you train? So maybe the mridangam, the organological question first.
Okay, that actually, even that's not a particularly simple question, but I'll try to make it as easy, as simple as possible. So the mridangam has two basically sides to it. It's a hand drum, so as you saw with the fingers and palms. This side here is kind of what we call the tonal side of the instrument, the varundale. This is made of three layers of leather. So there's goat, cow, and buffalo skin that's used here, and the central black part here is actually made of a stone and starch mixture. So there's actually 20 to 30 layers of this thin mixture that's applied here, and that's what actually gives us this whole pitched element to the instrument. This a very pitched sound, which actually acoustically is actually very similar to an instrument like the violin. So unlike a drum or percussion, actually it has the effect of a kind of the harmonic sound of a violin. The other side here, which you probably couldn't see, is the bass side of the instrument. This is also made of goat and buffalo, and this has more of a low bass tone. And there's a lot of little parts to the instrument. I wouldn't get into all of that, but basically the heads are fastened to the shell of the instrument, which is made out of jackwood, which is basically a tropical wood that jackfruit that many of you probably have had at some point in your lives. So the tree that bears the jackfruit. So that's the basics of how the instrument is kind of constructed. I guess a little bit about how we got into all of this. So that's also probably something that could take 9 months to explain. But I guess the long and short of it is, I can speak for myself that I was born and raised in America. I was born in Southern California, grew up in Michigan in a small town in Southwest Michigan called Kalamazoo. Some of you might have heard of it. And then I ended up going to school in New York, and I've now called the San Francisco Bay Area home for almost the last 8 years. So a lot of this, a lot of my early exposure really came through my family. So my parents were sort of aficionados of Carnatic music for most of their lives. They built up a huge collection of tapes, of vinyl and tapes over the years. They would buy things, but there was also kind of a sort of like a trader's market, where it's like, okay, I'll give you this tape, you give me that tape, and they had this huge collection of things. So I kind of grew up listening to these really, really vintage recordings that were actually not commercially available. These are things that were kind of just private recordings of like these legendary artists. So I kind of grew up with a lot of the music. My mom is a trained Indian classical singer, so I had the benefit of listening to her and also practicing with her when I was young. We happened to have a mridangam at home. My dad had a lifelong interest in learning, and we had an instrument at home. And all the stars aligned. Actually, when I was 8 years old, there happened to be a teacher in Kalamazoo, Michigan, who was a grad student at the university. He was from India. He had studied mridangam for a long time. His name was Damodaran Srinivasan, and he happened to be there. We happened to have an instrument, and I said, "Hey, Mom and Dad, I want to start learning." And I could say the rest is history, but there's actually a lot more twists and turns. But that's kind of how it started. I started my advanced training was with a master in India who I met just a few years later. I was sort of very lucky to be exposed to a lot of Indian classical music through these recordings. My parents would also take me to concerts in Detroit, Chicago, sort of the nearest big cities, and that was a big part of my exposure. And then I started performing and traveling at a pretty young age, both in the U.S. and in India, and just kind of that led me to pursuing music in college and in grad school, and here we are. So again, a lot of twists and turns, but that's kind of the major arc of it.
Yeah, my story is very similar. My mother is also a singer. I grew up in California my whole life, learned entirely here. My guru is Srimati Anuradha Sridhar, who is also, she was in the Bay Area. The Bay Area is an amazing place for the Indian arts. You just, not even tapes. Like we just had so many concerts, like so many visiting artists, music in the house all the time, music outside all the time. And then at some point, I, wanted to do it more seriously. So it's just been, I think, a sort of essential part of life from the beginning.
And
Yeah.
Rohan, I know you have done some teaching remotely and in person. Do you both teach? And if people online here are interested, how might they be able to start studying Indian music?
Yeah, absolutely. So all of my information's on my website, rohanrhythm.com. I've been teaching, in person and online for almost 2 decades now, believe it or not. I my very early musical training actually involved the speakerphone. So my first teacher left. He graduated from Kalamazoo. He moved, to Massachusetts. There were no other teachers around. So this is way before Skype, way before Zoom, way before COVID. And he said, "Hey, why don't we continue over the speakerphone?" And we said, "Okay, sure, why not? Why don't we try?" So it was this whole distance education thing. I was kind of interested in that, from the very get go, and so I started offering, online lessons, also way before COVID, and it's sort of continued throughout that. Um, and I also teach, at a college here in the Bay Area, Ohlone College, musicology and music theory.
Yeah, I teach a little bit. My info is also on my website. So
And what's your website once more?
SrutiSarathy.com.
Okay, great. Oh, there's one more question. And this should be the last one. It's an easy one. Do you tune the drum?
Yeah,
That's a great question.
good question. Yeah, you do. So so this pitch tonal aspect of the instrument, that sound is usually tuned to the tonic or the sort of bass note of the melodic artist or singer that you're performing with. So so it's tuned, and it's a whole process. Actually, you probably even saw me during the performance tapping with this thing here, tapping and doing all these things, tuning the instrument, fine tuning it. So basically, you kind of adjust the tension on the head to get the exact pitch of the instrument equal all around. You also tune the bass side, but it's not tuned to a specific note. It's just tuned to a kind of a general bass tone. But even that, there's a lot of maintenance with this instrument. Like you probably didn't see this, but I was actually adding some water to the bass side to keep it this nice bass tone. So this is not one of those. It's not like an electric keyboard or something. You just press a button and you get a sound. Like there's a lot of aspects to it. What's so beautiful about this instrument, and all of these acoustic instruments, is that it really takes on the personality of the performer, right? So if 10 of us could play on the same instrument, it'll sound like 10 different instruments. So it all comes down to your hands, your touch, your feel, what you put into the instrument. Um, so yes, there's a lot of tuning, a lot of things that we're juggling with these instruments.
Well, great. Thank you very much. I don't see any more questions. Normally, I would say I would encourage everyone to applaud, and I'm encouraging everyone to applaud at home right now. Um, and that's it. Thank you, folks, very much for attending. If you're in Richmond, check out the UR calendar next year when I hope we have a full series of live concerts, and hopefully very soon we could bring tonight's performers to Richmond to perform for us live. Thank you very much for attending.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks again, Andy. Thanks again, Michael. We're again very happy to be part of the series. Thank you all for tuning in. Yeah, we're so happy to connect virtually, and hopefully we'll get to see you soon, virtually and in person. And until then, stay safe, mask up, and get vaccinated as soon as you can.